Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. So, Bhante Suddhāso is back, and he'll be sharing some words of Dhamma with us tonight on the topic of equanimity or apathy. So, welcome so far to Ron, Kau's our friend, Kumu, and Adine, Jens as well, and Edward. And welcome to other friends who are watching behind the scenes. So at any time during the talk, feel free to type in questions and Bhante will address them at the end. But I'll pass things over for Bhante Suddhāso.
Okay. So we'll start with some meditation practice. And I think tonight I'm going to give Chan style instructions. So just sit and do nothing. That's it. So in all honesty, actually, often when we're doing meditation practice, we get so caught up in trying to do meditation practice that we miss out on the opportunity to allow the mind to relax into samadhi. We spend so much time trying to force the mind into samadhi that that forcefulness itself prevents the mind from unifying and collecting and stabilizing. So tonight, I'd like you to try the practice of allowing the mind to collect, allowing the activity of the mind to settle out and dissipate. So then your effort is the effort of remaining alert as the mind settles. It's the effort of not contributing to the activity of the mind, not contributing to the movements of the mind. And it's the effort to not be disturbed by the movements of the mind. So this is a very important element of samadhi practice. It's the element of non-disturbance, which is related to the subject of equanimity that I'll be talking about after the meditation. So as you sit in meditation, you're going to see a lot of mental objects coming and going. That's the nature of the mind. It's just how it is to have a mind. Sometimes it's noisy and sometimes it's less noisy and sometimes it's quiet. It's the nature of the mind. Just like the world around us. Sometimes it's noisy, sometimes less so, and sometimes it's quiet. So don't be bothered by the noise in the mind. Don't take it seriously. Just watch as it comes and goes, without following it, without reacting when it appears, either with desire or aversion, without reacting when it disappears, either with elation or depression. So just to be undisturbed as things come and go in the mind, to see them as irrelevant, insignificant, not worth getting wrapped up in. So this is the practice I'd like you to do for the next half an hour or so. And then I'll ring the bell and give a Dhamma talk. Okay, you can adjust your posture.
Thank you, Bhante, for guiding us. Well, starting us off in meditation. And welcome some more friends joining in. Denise, Binaural Dean, Melinda, Putrika, Amaranta, Jane, Kristen, and Mike. So welcome. So at this time, Bhante will be sharing some words of Dhamma. If you have questions at any time, feel free to type them into the live chat as they occur to you. And I will let Bhante take it from here.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Well, personally, I had a really nice meditation session, and now I don't really feel like talking. But that's not what we're doing. At this time, we're going to have a bit of discussion around this topic of equanimity. So one reason for this is because there's a long-standing misunderstanding. Many people don't understand the distinction between equanimity and apathy. When they hear about equanimity, they think that it just means you don't care. You're not interested. You don't care about anything. But I think that equanimity means neutrality, in the sense of not making value judgments about things, which also is not quite accurate, as I'll explain shortly. And another reason for this is because our friend Antoinette keeps asking me to give a talk on equanimity. So here we are, giving a talk on equanimity. But actually, realistically, equanimity is a topic which I like to speak about because it's very close to the heart of my practice. It's been a major ongoing theme in my Buddhist practice since longer than I can remember, so many, many, many years now. So it's been a really central and critical element of my approach to Buddhist practice. And it's also a quality which the Buddha speaks about extensively in many, many places. And it features in several important lists. So perhaps most notably, it's one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So upekkhā, equanimity, is one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. It's also identified as the primary component of 4th jhana. The defining characteristic of 4th jhana is equanimity. So again, a very important element of samadhi practice. And it's also associated with wisdom. So the equanimity that arises from wisdom, from knowing the nature of phenomena. When we truly know the nature of phenomena, then the natural tendency of the mind is towards equanimity. So it's necessary to have some understanding of what equanimity is, what we mean when we talk about equanimity. For this, it's helpful to take a closer look at this Pali word. So the Pali word that's usually translated equanimity is upekkhā. And this word upekkhā is a compound of the prefix upa. So upa means close or near. And the word ikkhā, which means to look at, to see, to watch, to pay attention to. So upekkhā then means to look closely, to pay close attention. So you can already see here how, by its very nature, this cannot be apathy. This simply is not compatible with the mind of apathy. So the mind of apathy is the mind which doesn't want to look closely at things because it doesn't care. It's the mind which is not interested in paying attention to things. Mind which takes no interest in anything at all. So apathy is a state of aversion, a state of pushing away, of rejecting experience. Whereas equanimity, one is paying close attention to experience to the point where one has some understanding of the nature of that experience. So in my mind, equanimity practice is naturally connected with wisdom. It's naturally connected with with an understanding of the nature of the experience that's happening. Because when we clearly understand what's happening, then what we see is it's just feeling arising and ceasing, sensations arising and ceasing. We're aware that whatever experience is present is impermanent, insubstantial, has no lasting essence, it has no essential substance to it. And we're aware that to react with desire is just producing suffering, just makes dukkha for ourselves. To react with aversion is just producing dukkha. It doesn't do any good either way. So this comes from a direct, clear observation of our experience, which is what we mean when we talk about equanimity. So equanimity is when one clearly sees one's experience. One sees it so clearly, so calmly, that one sees that one doesn't need to be affected by it. So equanimity, as described by the Buddha, naturally incorporates the elements of mindfulness and wisdom, which again is what sets it distinctly apart from apathy. So apathy usually does not include mindfulness. It's like, well, I don't care. I'm not interested. I'm not going to pay attention. Forget that. So there's no mindfulness there. You're not paying attention to it. You're not being aware of it. And there's no wisdom there either. Because with wisdom, one knows that everything that arises has a place within samsara. And if it is not fully understood, then we cannot be free of it. If we want to be free of phenomena, we must understand phenomena. If we want to be free of dukkha, we must understand dukkha and its causes. We must understand the manifestations of dukkha, the sources of dukkha, the varieties of dukkha. So again, this is pointing at the function of wisdom. Equanimity then can also be spoken about as the product of the development of wisdom. So as we get some understanding of the nature of dukkha, some understanding of how we produce our own dukkha moment by moment, some understanding of how we take phenomena, which are inherently neutral, just sensations arising and ceasing, We take those phenomena and we add on to them a reaction, of liking, disliking, or disinterest. And that reaction generates dukkha. Therefore, if we don't react, there's no dukkha. Isn't that interesting? It actually makes practice sound pretty simple when we put it in those terms. Be aware of what's arising without reacting. And an interesting result of that, by the way, is that when we are clearly aware and non-reactive, then we can know what the appropriate response is. And we have the mental space and the self-control to do what's appropriate. So not only to know what the appropriate response is, but actually to have the capacity to enact that appropriate response. So equanimity also is not inaction. So a couple days ago, I was giving a talk to another group, to New York Insight, and one of the points that I was making was that there's this stereotype of the Theravada monk who just sits by and lets the world go to hell around them. Like who will just sit by and watch impassively as the murderer stabs people, sits by and watches impassively as horrible things happen. But this is actually not the Buddhist teachings at all. The Buddha does not teach that we should just sit by impassively and do nothing. That's not what he says. In fact, the Buddha says that to not act when one should act is unwholesome. If one has a capacity to help and one does not help, then that is unwholesome. One is choosing not to be of benefit. One is choosing not to help when one can. That generates bad karma. It's an unwholesome decision. So once again, equanimity is not impassivity. Equanimity is not uncaring, unfeeling inactivity. Rather, equanimity gives us the space and clarity and stability to respond appropriately to the needs of each moment, to respond with the most wholesome and relevant activity that each moment requires. And sometimes the most wholesome response is to do nothing. Sometimes that's true. But often, doing nothing is decidedly unwholesome. Often, doing nothing is simply generating more dukkha. So equanimity is, as I was speaking just now, it's the result of wisdom. So one can see wisdom practice, if done correctly, naturally resulting in equanimity. But one can also cultivate equanimity as a practice in and of itself. And this is somewhat easier, I think, for most people. Rather than approaching it through the wisdom route, is instead approaching equanimity directly. So through recognizing the unpleasantness of aversion, recognizing the discomfort of desire, and cultivating an appreciation for peace of mind. So one of the practices the Buddha recommends is upassamanusati, so the recollection of peacefulness. So remembering that it's possible for the mind to be peaceful. And this is quite interesting. So sometimes I've had times in meditation where my mind was just so chaotic and noisy and messy. And I'm just like, oh, horrible, painful, miserable mind. And I'm like, wait a minute. My mind hasn't always been like this. There's times when my mind has been peaceful. Sometimes it only lasts a couple of seconds. But there's been times when my mind was peaceful. And I'm like, oh, yeah, peace of mind. I remember that. Yeah, that was great. Oh, I could have that now too. Oh, that'd be awesome. Oh, here it is. That was great. Here it is. Wow. Wasn't so far away. Sometimes all we have to do is remember peace of mind, and it suddenly is within our grasp. It always has been within our grasp. We just need to remember that it's within our grasp. We just need to remember that it's possible. Remember that it's a choice. It's a choice to have a peaceful mind. So then this is a way of approaching equanimity practice. Some sensation is happening that we really hate, and we're like, oh, I hate this. This is awful. I wish this would stop. Oh, wait a minute. It's possible to have a peaceful mind. Oh, yeah. Well, then maybe I should stop hating this sensation, because hating this sensation is what's preventing the mind from being peaceful. Or rolling around in desire. We're thinking about our celebrity crush, that cute Chinese boy, and we're like, oh, he's so cute. He's so perfect. He's the best. So sweet. Ah. And we're like, wait a minute. Is this a peaceful state of mind? Not really. Have I had peaceful states of mind? Yeah. That time when I was sitting in the monastery and it was so lovely doing 10 hours of meditation every day. And every now and then my mind would be silent and alert. That was great. I could do that now. Wouldn't that be lovely? So the recollection of peace helps to encourage us to point the mind back towards equanimity, to release the desire or the aversion that we're wrapped up in and bring it back to equanimity. And then also when the mind is dull or hazy or unclear, or when the mind is wrapped up in apathy, when the mind is uncaring and unfeeling, it's like, oh, I just can't bring myself to care about this experience. Why would I bother with this? Well, pay attention to how uncomfortable that is as well. It's a more subtle form of discomfort, but it's still not the bright, serene happiness of peace of mind. And once again, we recollect peacefulness of mind. We recollect that there is such a thing as peace of mind. It is something which can be reached. It is something which we can access through intention. And equanimity of mind also naturally supports the development of samadhi. So, as I mentioned earlier, fourth jhana is characterized by perfect equanimity. But equanimity is actually a component of all four jhanas to one degree or another. It just becomes stronger as one progresses to second, third, and fourth jhana. But actually, equanimity is a strong element right from first jhana. And equanimity is also a strong factor in developing samadhi leading up to first jhana. And the reason for this is because in order for the mind to stabilize, it needs to cease blindly reacting to whatever comes and goes. In order for the mind to be stable, it needs to be non-reactive. And it also needs to be clearly aware, completely alert. So mindfulness and equanimity. Once again, these are the two perfect qualities of fourth jhana, but there are also qualities that are present in a less perfect state in the development of samadhi all the way up through third jhana as well. So cultivating equanimity, often what happens when we're trying to meditate and there's thoughts coming and going and we're like, oh, I hate all these thoughts. They're really disturbing my meditation. No, they're not. No, the thoughts are not disturbing your meditation. Your hatred of the thoughts is disturbing the meditation. Or you're sitting here and you're like, oh, my body is in so much pain. My shoulder hurts, my back hurts, my knees hurt, my hips hurt, my everything hurts. Well, guess what's disturbing your meditation? It's not the pain. It's your hatred of the pain. Or once again, you're sitting here thinking about your celebrity crush. Guess what's disturbing your meditation? the desire for thoughts about your celebrity crush. Wow, that was easy. So realistically, if we're honest with ourselves, it's usually not too hard to figure out what it is that's preventing us from developing samadhi. It's not the sound of the heating system. It's not the pain in your body. It's not the airplane flying by. None of that's the problem. Desire and aversion, that's the problem. It's notable that in the 5 hindrances, the first two that the Buddha points to are desire and aversion, because these are the two most potent ways that we sabotage our meditation practice. They're the most potent ways that we sabotage our samadhi, desire and aversion. And this is exactly what equanimity practice counteracts, desire and aversion. These are the first things to fall away as we cultivate equanimity. This mind that looks very closely at each arising moment without reacting to it. So I think I've said more than enough. Realistically, Buddhism is really simple. Just stop making yourself suffer. That's all. And equanimity is really simple. Pay close attention without reacting. Samadhi is really simple. Just do nothing without falling asleep. This stuff is really not complicated. Until you start getting into emptiness and not self and all that, then it gets a little bit complicated. But actually, that's not too complicated either. Emptiness, absolutely nothing is substantial at all. It's emptiness. Not self, nothing's about you, nothing's personal at all. It's actually not that complicated. In theory, not that complicated. What makes it seem complicated is our deep-rooted subconscious habits of pretending the world is something other than what it is. That's why Buddhism seems complicated. That's why Buddhist practice seems so difficult. But Buddhist practice itself, not complicated. Buddhist concepts, not complicated. Our own desire, aversion, and delusion, now that's a whole mess. Tangled mess. That's complicated. If we can practice desire, aversion, and delusion, well, then clearly we know how to do really complicated things, and Buddhism should be simple by comparison. But it sounds like I'm about to start giving another Dhamma talk on another subject, so I think I'm going to stop there. So these are a few words on the subject of equanimity. So I hope this was of benefit. And at this time, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and share them, and I'll answer as best I can. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Bhante. And as Gita said, it looks like you had a very fruitful retreat. Lots of words of wisdom. And so welcome to a couple more people joining in. Yudi, Sai, and Vortex as well. And so far, just a few. Oh,
Andrew.
Andrew? Oh, lovely. Okay.
Just a few comments and questions so far. And if anybody else has anything, feel free to type it in. So Binaural Dean says, this equanimity in the fourth jhana, can this also be translated as emptiness?
No. Anything else? Any other questions?
Okay. And then Gita says, equanimity is the most wonderful teaching. Thanks for teaching us words of Dhamma. Kumu says, it's amazing how each state feeds into other mental states for both wholesome and unwholesome deeds.
Yeah, definitely. Also, one of the really lovely things about the Dhamma is how any one piece of the Dhamma, when investigated, naturally brings in the whole net. So one of the images that's used is like this vast net with many different nodes. And if you pick up any one node, you're actually picking up the whole net. Another piece of imagery that's used is like if you have an infinite number of uh, mirrored balls, mirrored spheres, then every one of those spheres will reflect all of the others. So it's like that with the Dhamma. You pick up any one piece of the Dhamma and you see all the other pieces reflected in it.
And Adine says, so is the reactive mind the second arrow in the simile of the dart or arrow?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's one place where the Buddha is talking about this.
And Kauser friend says, upekkhā is also one of the Brahma Viharas. Could you perhaps talk about that a bit, specifically how we can practice radiating upekkhā towards others, like one would with metta?
Yeah, so I heard a number of different ways that this is spoken about. So one way that I found it spoken about, which is useful, is to relate to the four Brahma Viharas as a progression, where each one is an increasingly refined state of mind. So then seeing equanimity then is at the final stage of the development of this radiant mind, this joyful mind, this limitless mind, this boundless mind. So in the beginning, we're wishing, may everyone be happy. So very, very simple, almost childlike attitude. And also a phenomenally unrealistic one, to be perfectly honest here. Because the truth is that most people are not happy and there isn't really anything we can do about that. And the second one is wishing for all beings to be free of suffering. Again, beautiful mind state, not very realistic. Very expansive, very wonderful, very sublime state of mind. And the third one, rejoicing in the good experiences that people have, rejoicing in the good fortune that people have. Starting to get a little bit better here, actually. This is a little more subtle. We're not necessarily wishing for anything in particular, but rather we're appreciating the pleasantness and goodness that's present in the world that people experience. So that's actually a bit more serene and steady of a state of mind. But it also does run up against reality a little bit in that sometimes there's not so much good fortune being experienced. There's not so much happiness and pleasantness being experienced. So then the final development to the Brahma Viharas is like, well, no matter how things are, my mind can remain peaceful. So no matter what condition, whether beings are happy or unhappy, whether they suffer or don't suffer, whether they experience good fortune or bad fortune, this mind doesn't need to be swept up in that. This mind doesn't need to suffer on account of that. This mind doesn't need to be unhappy or disturbed because of that. So that's one way of relating to upekkhā in the context of the Brahma Viharas. And it's bringing the mind towards, once again, a state of non-reactivity, but also clear awareness, clear knowingness. That's one way of relating to it. And the concept of radiating it, I've never really liked the term radiating in the context of the Brahma Viharas, but pervading or all-encompassing. That's something which is, for me, those are verbs which work a little bit better. Because more it's saying that in the case of the fourth one, our equanimity extends to everything in the universe. So it tends to be like as, well, I've got equanimity towards Zimbabwe, but my equanimity towards the refrigerator here, well, that's a little bit weaker, but big deal, I've got the Zimbabwe. Well, realistically, that doesn't count for a whole lot. Unless you live in Zimbabwe, then it's important. Or if you have family there or something, then it's important. So replace Zimbabwe with something that doesn't really have any significance in your life. Or we're like, well, I've got equanimity towards Jupiter. It's like, well, okay, that's great, I guess. But it doesn't really mean anything. So it's saying that our equanimity is so vast and unshakable that it encompasses everything in the universe. Nothing anywhere could shake our equanimity. Nothing anywhere could generate an unwholesome reaction in the mind. That's more how I take the sense of limitless radiation of equanimity. Okay. Anything else?
Mhm. And Amir says, is equanimity basically acknowledgement and then letting go of the five khandhas?
Acknowledgement and then letting go of the five khandhas. I mean, that's a perfectly fine practice, but would I call that equanimity practice? Hmm. To be honest, that feels more like wisdom practice. But as I was saying earlier, these things kind of blur together at the edges. And equanimity is a natural result of wisdom, and wisdom is a natural result of equanimity. So I would personally put that more in the wisdom category, but it does kind of blur together. Yeah.
And Reynaldo says, if equanimity is a byproduct of wisdom, could it be lost?
Well, prior to attaining stream entry, you can lose anything that you've developed. Anything. I remember I was talking to one teacher many years ago, and he said, "I really don't like it when people leave the monastery before they're enlightened." And I was like, he's got a point. And his point was basically is like people leave the monastery and they usually backslide dramatically in a very short period of time. They lose all their samadhi, they lose all their equanimity, they lose all their wisdom, they lose all their mindfulness. And it was lovely that they spent some time in the monastery, but not so lovely that they lost it so quickly. So yeah, if you don't make at least that first earth-shattering breakthrough of wisdom, then whatever you think you've accumulated can be lost. This is true. Yep.
And Adine says, I'd like to pose a question about the talk last night, but related to equanimity. You said something to the effect that all arising is dukkha. Could you expound on that?
That's a whole Dhamma talk in itself. So no, I'm not going to give a longer explanation at this time. Great topic though. Yeah, great topic.
Well, we could put it in the topic.
Yeah. And it will probably come up
Next
relatively
week.
soon. Yeah. And Yudi says, is equanimity having a balanced mind under any circumstance?
Well, it depends on what you mean by balanced. The simplest explanation of equanimity is that it's the mind which does not fall into either desire or aversion. So an alert mind, free of desire and aversion. That's a very simple and direct definition. So if that's what you mean by balanced, then yes.
And then Yudi says, but getting to that mental state requires a significant amount of meditation and constant mindfulness, I assume.
Oh, it certainly helps. Yeah. Yeah. And also a certain amount of wisdom. The wisdom of knowing that desire makes us unhappy. Aversion makes us unhappy. And dullness, spaciness, distraction makes us unhappy. So there has to be a certain amount of wisdom, a certain amount of understanding of the nature of dukkha. in order to cultivate strong equanimity.
That was the last question on YouTube so far.
There is a question on Facebook from Canute. Good to see you, Canute, from Jamaica. And says, speaking of monasteries and spending time at monasteries, any sense when retreats will resume? Getting vaccinated in... I don't know, I can't see it. So the retreats, we don't have a date for that, but we have dates for residencies. So you're welcome to send an email to info@emptycloud.org, and someone will get back to you
Yes.
with the information.
Yes, so we are allowing a small number of residents at the monastery. So you can, if you're interested, you can send us an email and learn more about the details of that.
Are there any live audience questions?
There is also, Canute says, I like the image of equanimity as a mountain. Winter comes, the mountain remains. Spring comes, the mountain remains. Unfortunately, I can't open up the rest of the message. It doesn't work. Facebook always has some kind of new update problematic, but maybe you can see it up there. I'm not sure.
Let's see.
Yeah, that only works if the mountain has eyes. Otherwise, that feels a little more like apathy. But if the mountain is clearly aware, then that's a good imagery to use.
And then I had a question, actually, because it occurred to me, especially with, well, the world has no shortage of suffering, but say, for example, with what's currently happening in Burma, how can a practitioner sort of approach that situation when it can feel overwhelming, trying to figure out what to do, how much to do, or even whether the appropriate response is to do something, or, how does one sort of navigate that, or can one navigate that?
I think the most important thing is to always come back to your wholesome intention. So recognizing that you do have a wholesome intention of wanting to help, wanting to be of benefit, wanting to do the right thing. And it is confusing and it is difficult to know what the right course of action is. It is difficult to know how much to do. But you have that wholesome intention. So even if you do the wrong thing, or you don't do enough, or you do too much, you're trying. You're trying to do the right thing. And as long as you keep trying to develop a clearer understanding of what the appropriate response is, then you'll get better. You'll get better at responding appropriately. So being very forgiving and gentle with yourself, acknowledging that we do have this very wholesome intention, but there's also limits. Since we're unenlightened, there's limits to how well we can enact that wholesome intention in the world. But we're trying, and we want to get better. And the more we practice, the better we'll get. Okay.
I did see it.
Great.
And there was actually a question popped up where someone said, I'm wondering if you have any advice for Burmese friends who are experiencing mental health distress due to violence in Myanmar. So maybe, unless you want to add more.
I mean, first off, I think we do just need to acknowledge one thing which the Buddha spoke about in many places. Which is that samsara is a disaster. And we should not expect it to be anything else. Periods of peacefulness are the exception in human history. They're not the rule, they're the exception. Periods of stability are not the rule, they're the exception. So we shouldn't be surprised when there's violence and instability and war. Shouldn't surprise us at all. The human mind is characterized by desire, aversion, and delusion. So we shouldn't be surprised when politicians start displaying desire, aversion, and delusion. Why would we expect anything else? So starting with a heavy dose of realism here. What's going on in Burma is not good, but it's not surprising because this is still samsara, and samsara is still a mess. And why would we expect it to be anything else? So just starting with that dose of realism, and then we ask ourselves, what can I do to help? So in terms of friends who are having a hard time, well, sometimes the thing to do is to listen to them, or do acts of kindness for them, or to ask them, what can I do to help you? I'm here for you. How can I help? And do the best you can. If there wasn't a pandemic, I would tell you to go over to their place and give them a hug. But, well, that may not be the best option under these times. But find ways to express caring without physical contact. See what you can do.
And Knut's comment had said, so winter comes, spring comes, the mountain remains. It's responsive to the facts of the case, but doesn't fundamentally change. The mountain doesn't change.
Yeah, I don't like that simile so much. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I like it.
Okay.
And Knut also said getting vaccinated in 2 weeks.
Oh, lovely. Good.
Great.
Yeah.
Fandom.
As in he wants to come.
Send us an email.
Yeah.
We surely want you to come here.
Yeah, it's definitely an option. So we do allow a small number of monastery residents. Send us an email for the info.
And then, well, Yudi said, can I bring Yoshi? You know what that
That's her
means?
dog.
It's her dog.
I'm sorry, but no, we do not allow pets. Again, send us an email if you have questions about the residency program.
Yes. So other than that, lots of thank yous.
I have something to say.
Oh, sure.
Not necessarily a question, but I got clarity around equanimity versus apathy. That what's been there for me is other people perceive equanimity as apathy because we have the expectation that we will react a certain way, and so when people do not react a certain way, then they read it as one doesn't care. So it's me trying to manage other people's expectations of how I react because they don't know any other way for people to react. Like they haven't witnessed what equanimity looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, so sometimes as Buddhist practitioners, we have to make an extra effort to show that we care. But that we care within a space of undisturbable peace. And many people, this is really hard for them to understand because they relate to the world in terms of reactivity. And they define people in terms of reactivity. So to meet somebody who is non-reactive and yet completely caring, often they just have absolutely no paradigm to fit that into, which is great because then you are introducing them to another way of being in the world, a much more wholesome way of being in the world. Okay? Yeah.
Sadhu.
Anything else?
What you just said actually reminds me of a quote from Bhante Suddhāso. Well, I heard him say it, so I guess that's a quote technically. But he said something that he often reflected on, especially in terms of family, was that sharing, I care about you, but I can't control your happiness or unhappiness.
Yeah, that's equanimity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I guess the final comment from Yudi is it's hard not to react when we're driven by emotions.
Yeah, that's true. That's because you haven't yet realized that you're not driven by emotions. Emotions come and go, but they don't drive you. When you realize that, then you will know equanimity. Okay? Anything else?
Kumu. I think every time you say anything else, reactivity is very tiring, energy consuming.
Yeah, yeah, true.
Well, on YouTube, that seems to be it. All right, so thank you everyone for joining us tonight, for all your questions, comments, interaction. You can join us again tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. New York City time. We'll have Sutta study with Aya Soma, I believe. So join us then if you can. And then in the evening for another Dhamma talk and meditation at 7:30 p.m. So you can always find our schedule of live streams on YouTube and any other events on our website. So we can end the night with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy the rest of your night.